Hi there everyone, welcome back to part 2 of the Dead Earth game development series. I'm Gary Simmons and this video is going to be a very short video indeed. All I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to create a brand new project in Unity, bring in a few of the standard assets that we're going to need to start building Dead Earth, and that's it really. And then in the next video we'll actually sort of start focusing on AI and navigation. So the reason that I've sort of separated this section out into its own small video is because I want to show me creating the project for completeness, but I also didn't want it tagged on the end of another video that might be more focused on a particular topic. That way, if later on down the line you wish to go back and review some of this material, like say for example you wish to go back and watch the AI pathfinding tutorial, you don't have to sit through a load of project setup at the beginning of it. Okay, so I'm going to fire up Unity and create a new project. Now the first thing you'll notice when I start up Unity is we get this project selection dialog. Now by default, at least it always used to be this way, the default configuration of Unity is such that when you start Unity up, it will always try and load in automatically the last project that you were working on, and you will not get this dialog displayed. Now, if you're only working on one project at a time, that can be very useful. It saves you having to go through this project selection process. However, if like me, you're working on several large projects at the same time and bouncing between them, this can actually be a real pain in the butt. For example, let's say that I want to load in my Balls of Glory project or my Match Baker project. If the last project I'd been working on was Dead Earth, Unity wouldn't show me this dialog box and would automatically load in Dead Earth. Now that's a very big project with lots of assets, and it takes quite a while to load in and for Unity to become responsive. So I don't want to have to sit through all of that simply to close it down and load in another project. So in a moment, when we've created the new project, for those of you that don't know, I'll show you how you can always force this dialog to be displayed if you're working on several projects like I am. Okay, so let's create a new project. I'm going to create this on my desktop. So you see, Users Gary Desktop. And I think I'm going to call this Dead Earth Student Project. Why not? And you can see that we have a choice between 2D and 3D modes. Dead Earth is of course a 3D game, it's a first person shooter, so I'm going to leave this in 3D mode. And this basically just allows Unity to configure the UI to better suit the type of project you're working on. And as we're going to be working on a 3D game, we want Unity to configure all the UI and the scene view windows such that they're better suited for working in three-dimensional space. Now we can of course click here and import some of the standard assets, but I'm not going to do that because I want to import them separately in a minute. There's only a few that we need to bring in right now to start sort of working in the next lesson, and I want to discuss each of those as I bring them in. So for now we've got no assets selected and I'm just going to create the project. So here I am in the new Unity project. If I just check my desktop, you can see there I now have the Dead Earth Student Project folder on my desktop, and we've got pretty much what you would expect to see. We have the project window, and in the assets folder you can see it's completely empty. No assets have been added to our project, and we also by default have this empty scene created for us. Well, I say it's empty, it's not actually empty. It's got a camera and it's got a directional light. Those are the two default objects that Unity puts in that empty scene for us. Now if we were going to start working on this scene and start adding things to it, then we'd need to make sure that we save that scene to our project, okay? Because it isn't saved by default. But it doesn't matter at the moment because we're not going to be working on any scenes. We're simply going to be bringing in some assets and setting up our project. But before I do that, let me just show you how we force that project selection dialog to be displayed at Unity Startup. You go to the Edit menu and you select Preferences. Under the General tab, you'll see the second line down, there is an option which I have unticked which says Load Previous Project on Startup. If that is unticked, then you will have the project selection dialog box displayed. If it's ticked, like so, then it will automatically load in the previous project you were working on, which I believe is the default state. So untick that if you don't want that behavior. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to bring in some of Unity's standard asset packages. I don't need very many. All I need is I just need some basic building blocks that I can use in the upcoming lessons to construct some test environments and some test geometry. And I'm also going to bring in Unity's first-person controller, as that will become the prototype for our own first-person controller, and eventually we're going to kind of derive our own more functional first-person controller from those scripts that Unity has provided us with. Now, I'm going to be honest, when I was first tasked with creating Dead Earth, I hadn't really used Unity's navigation and pathfinding subsystems, and I hadn't also done a whole lot with Mechanim, and I certainly hadn't experimented with merging Mechanim and its navigation subsystems together. So those were the biggest unknowns to me and the things that I wanted to start working on right away. And I'm going to structure this course such that it mirrors my own experience. So in the next lesson, we're going to start exactly where I started, by trying to understand Unity's navigation and pathfinding subsystems, and then eventually in the lessons that follow, using Mechanim, using its root motion, and seeing how we can get Mechanim and root motion controlled characters to play nicely with Unity's nav agents. But that's all for another lesson. For now, we just need to import those assets. So I'm going to go to the Assets menu. I'm going to go to Import Package, and I'm going to bring in the prototyping package. This is the one that contains lots of building blocks, things such as cubes, walls, floors, and stairways, things that we can use to very quickly mock up a sort of test environment for when we wish to test out the AI pathfinding. It's not always helpful to go to the asset store and download the most complex and functional level when you're just testing. Sometimes it's much nicer to test out your new code on a very simple set of assets. So looking in the project view now, we can see that the standard assets folder has been created, and as well as the prototyping folder, which contains all of these kind of blocks. Let me pull those up a little bit so we can see these little blocks here, look. As well as those being imported with their materials and stuff, you can see that a couple of other folders have also been sort of dragged in because the prototyping assets rely on them. So you can see we've got the cross-platform input scripts and prefabs, and there's a load of utility scripts in there as well. And there's also an editor folder that's been created, and in there you'll see scripts that will be used to generate custom inspectors for some of those standard assets. Okay, but we can ignore those for now. We're not really worried about those. And the next thing I want to bring in is I want to once again go to the Assets menu. I want to go to Import Package, and I wish to import the Characters package. The Characters package contains the first-person controller that we're going to use right off the bat to give us sort of first-person controller functionality, so that we can walk around our level just like we would an actual game. And there you can see, if we look in the project view now, there is now a characters folder, and there is the first person character, because there's also like a third person character and a rollerball controller. Don't even know what that is. Don't worry about it though. And in the first person controller and in the prefabs folder, you'll see there's actually two prefabs that we can use that are actually very different, but both are there to essentially provide us with a first person controller. Now, the first one I'll talk about is the Fps Controller. Now, the Fps Controller is very much like the first-person controller that has always been available in Unity since version 3, or perhaps even earlier. I wasn't using it then. And that is, it basically implements the first-person controller using Unity's character controller component. This is a very special type of collider that performs its own collision and response code, and we essentially just tell that controller when we wish it to move and in which direction we wish it to move. And the character controller isn't in any way listening to the physics system with respect to forces being emitted in the world. So if we were to, for example, create an explosion in the world that blew all of the geometry away because they were rigid bodies, our character controller would not be affected by those forces, okay? That's one of the downsides of the FPS controller, but you'll see in a moment that there's also a rigid body FPS controller that we can use if we really need this functionality. We're going to be using the FPS controller for reasons that I'll talk about in a moment, and when we need our character to react to forces, well, we'll do that via scripting, and we'll detect those cases and do them manually. So the second controller that we have here is the Rigidbody Controller. This is basically a prefab that just represents the character controller as a capsule collider attached to a non-kinematic rigid body, and it has a script assigned to it which basically moves the character around by just applying forces to the collider, just like we move any other physics object in PhysX. This might sound like it's exactly what we need, because the great thing about the character controller actually being a rigid body is it will be affected by physical forces in the world. It will automatically be affected by gravity, by explosions, and all those types of things. The only problem that I've found with the rigid body controller is it can be very finicky. So if you've got a level that's filled with lots of sort of debris and small curbs and rocks and boulders and just general clutter, you can find with the rigid body controller it's not that friendly in that situation. It's not so bad when you're already traveling at speed, because the momentum carries you over. But if you were to walk into a pile of debris, stop moving, and then begin sort of accelerating again, you can find that it's hard to get going and you can get stuck on little bits and pieces of debris. So as our game world is apocalyptic and it's going to be absolutely plastered with debris and boxes and clutter, I want to use the FPS controller. And I'm going to show you how I modify this controller in later lessons anyway. The final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create some folders that I'm going to be using to store pretty much everything that I create to do with Dead Earth. I don't just want to throw this stuff right in the root assets folder, because it's going to get mixed in with a lot of other stuff. For example, if we look in the project view at the moment, you can see that we have the editor and standard assets folders that were created by Unity when we imported the standard assets, the characters and the prototyping packages. But if I just flick over to the current up-to-date version of Dead Earth project, you can see that that project view is now filled with lots and lots of folders. Now the reason this is because my brother Darren is also working on creating all of the levels for this game. So and we're connected via the SVN, so that you know, he can make changes and I can make changes, and we can both work on the same project. Now, in order to build Dead Earth, we've had to purchase lots of assets from the asset store, and Darren will certainly be telling you which ones we've purchased, and I'll also be showing you some of those as well. But when we import packages from the asset store, they create their own folders in the sort of the root, the assets folder of our project view, and we kind of want to leave them where they decide to be put, because if we later want to go back and update those packages, or if, for example, the author has released an up-to-date version of the package, then we wish to re-import them, and if we've moved all of the assets from their original location, we can get duplicate assets, or the assets won't update properly, and our scenes will be referencing objects that exist in the modified folder, not in the new updated asset folder. So what you can see here, every folder is pretty much a package that we've bought off of the asset store, and we're just leaving them exactly where they are. Now, of course, the problem is with that is when it comes time for me to create my own scripts and my own prefabs and my own materials and textures, you know, I want them to be put in a place where I can easily get to them. So you can see that if we look in the project view here, scrolling through all those, you'll see there is just a folder there called Dead Earth. And in the Dead Earth folder, you can see all of these subfolders where I actually put all my stuff. So, for example, if I drill down into my prefabs folder, there is a folder here called AI Characters, and those are all the prefabs that I've created for the zombies, or at least the zombies that I've created so far. Now, of course, those zombies have all come from various different packages that actually exist in various different folders throughout the project view. But I don't care about that. Once I've found the one that I want, I drag it into the scene, I kind of configure the prefab, and then I can just drag those zombies then and create prefabs from them in my own Dead Earth prefabs folder, so I know where everything is when I want them. And the same with my scripts. You know, when you import packages from the asset store, they will all have their own scripts and their own scenes and all that sort of stuff. Like, for example, here is a package called Dirty Apartments. There are Dirty Apartments. If we look at Dirty Apartments, we can see, you know, it has its own demo scenes, it has its own prefabs, It has its own materials. We're just going to leave all of those there so that if we ever wish to update that package, they'll all be updated, and our scenes will always be referencing those objects, those materials, and those textures in their correct locations. But of course, it's not nice for me to work like that, so all of the scenes I create, all of the materials I create, all of the scripts I create will all be in this Dead Earth folder. So going back to our version, let's just create that Dead Earth folder now, so that in the next lesson we don't have to worry about doing things like that. And I'm going to create some other folders as well now. Okay, so I've created materials, prefabs, scripts, sounds and textures. That will do for now. Oh, I'll tell you what I will also do as well. I will create an editor folder. Now, for those of you that might not know, the editor folder, spelt with a capital E in Unity, takes on a very special purpose. We can have multiple editor folders. They can exist as children of other folders. So wherever there's an editor folder, you can almost think of them as all being treated as like one big editor folder. They're all merged together. But it's in these editor folders that we can put editor scripts. These are scripts that we will use to write custom inspectors and do some sort of custom rendering in the scene view. And we're going to be using some of those scripts as well, and writing some editor scripts in the next couple of lessons. Okay, so I think that's all the folders that we need for now. That list will grow as we work our way through the lessons, but for now that's all we need. And in the next lesson we're going to start designing our navigation and pathfinding systems that will be used by our zombies so that they can navigate the world. Okay, bye for now. See you in the next lesson.